This time I'm going to show you how to make this handy tablet sleeve, and I'll show you how I came up with the measurements as well, because if your tablet is a slightly different size to mine, you're going to want to make it a nice snug fit. Now with this one I've made a pocket on the front as well, so let's open it up. The pocket on mine is plenty big enough to keep my mobile phone, or it could be pens or a small notebook in there, and then your tablet sits nice and snugly inside the large pocket, and this is all padded as well. So I've put all of the cutting instructions and the materials list in the description box below, so go get your fabrics and let's get sewing. So to cut my fabric, this is going to be the front of the pouch. I've actually cut it 1 inch larger, or 2.5 centimetres larger to each side, and then 1/2 inch larger at the top, so just over 1 centimetre there at the top. So if you've got a different size tablet to mine, that's how I worked out the measurements. And then for the back, this is the same width as the front piece, so let's just pop that on there. So my tablet's going to sit inside like so, and this piece is longer because it'll fold over the front, and that's going to make a flap. And you can see I've already put some wadding on the back of this, and I have used wadding this time. Valaiseline H640 is normally my favourite fusible fleece to use on things like this, but this time I've used an 8-20 wadding because that's just what I had to hand. And I've used a 505 spray to adhere this to the wrong sides of the front of the pouch, and of the long section to the back of it as well, and it just adds that extra little bit of protection. I would use some kind of wadding or fusible fleece, don't just make it out of fabric because it won't have so much protection. Okay, so that's the front and the back. I can put my tablet to one side for now. I've cut out a piece of lining fabric to the same size, so that one's going to be the lining of the front, and then of course I've got the same size for the lining of the back. And this one I'm actually going to fasten over with a button and a hair bungee, so that's how this one's going to fasten. I'm also going to put a pocket on the front, so those two pieces are the inside. My front pocket I'm having from the same lining fabric, so I've got one piece which is again backed with wadding, and then a lining piece to the same. So I'm going to have a contrast look to my pouch. So this is how it'll look when it's gone together. So that'll be the inside, that will be the outside. So I'll have a pocket on the front, tablet goes in here, fastens over here with a button and a bungee. Really, really simple to make. Now the first thing I'm going to do is to take my outer and lining large pieces, and I'm just going to make curves in the corner of the flap. Now do be aware that if you're using a directional fabric, at one point it's going to be upside down when it folds over. So if you do want to use a directional fabric, two things: you can either make sure that it's facing the right way from the front and accept that your fabric will be upside down on the back, or before you cut out your pattern pieces you could make a join. So cut your fabric in two, turn them around so that they're both facing in the right direction when that's folded over, so the tops of your fabric will be joined together, and then you'll have a seam across the top here. But non-directional plain fabric is an awful lot easier to work with on something like this. Right, so I'm just going to cut this by eye. If you have something circular, maybe, no, let's use a ribbon reel. Something like this. I'm going to do them all together at the same time, so I'm just lining those up perfectly. Something around about 3 inches, 4 inches across, and then you can just draw. That's not very clear, let me just change pens. There we go. Just draw around the curve here, and on this side. And then just cut around the curve. Like so. And to make sure that they're symmetrical, you can always fold in half and match them up. I think that looks pretty good. What I'd also like to do while I'm shaping these is to put a gentle curve around the top of the pocket pieces. So again, if you have maybe a plate or a circle template, you could use that and draw around it. But again, I'm just going to cut this curve. Like so. So in effect, I've cut away about an inch or 2.5 centimetres from the top. I've just made a curve out of that. Just makes it a little bit different. Okay, then we're going to piece all of these together, so we don't need this. So the first thing to do is to actually put the fastenings on. So my button's going to go at the front down here. What I can do is to place these pieces together. So I've got the padded piece on the top, and just put my pocket on there so I can gauge where the button's going to go. I'll give you the measurements as well, but again, if you're working this out for a different size, then your button placement might be a little bit different to mine. And that's going to fold over quite snugly with my loop about here. So I want my button to be about there. So we'll measure this to make sure that it's right in the centre, which it is. That's 4¼ inches. And from the top of my curved section, that's 2 inches down. Or if you're measuring from the top of the actual pocket, it's 6 inches down. So that's either 5 centimetres or 15 centimetres from the top of the pocket. I think it's always useful to see how I work out where that goes. As I said, particularly if you're making these in different sizes, it may be a much smaller version just to keep a phone in, or it may be a larger version if your tablet's larger than my iPad. So when you understand how I got to where that is, then it's going to be easier for you to make these in different sizes. So let's pop the button on. I'm going to use an embroidery thread because my fabric's really bright and colourful. I thought I'd have a bright and colourful button and bright and colourful thread to sew it on with. So let's just sew this directly over that spot. And it's a nice strong thread, embroidery thread as well. So I'll just go over this a couple of times just to make it nice and secure. I'm not pulling this too tight, and I'll show you why in just a second. So back through there. This is the final stitch I'm going to make, but this time I'm not going all the way through the fabric. I'm going to tip the button up and just push the needle out underneath the button, and then I'm going to twist this around a few times to make a shank. That's why I didn't pull the threads too tight underneath there, and that raises the button away from the fabric slightly, which gives you room for the elastic bungee to go around. Then I can take my needle back through to the wrong side of the fabric and just knock that off. So that's a nice secure button with room for the elastic bungee, because that bungee is actually quite thick. Okay, then let's take the two front pocket pieces and we're going to sew these right sides together just around the top. And I'm using about 1/4 inch or 6mm seam allowance. I'm actually using the edge of my presser foot as a seam guide, so I think it's slightly over 1/4 inch, but it doesn't really make much difference on a project like this. Just line up those edges, and if you wanted to pin that, then that's an option. And then I'm just going to snip into the curves, and that's going to help the seam to sit flatter. If you have pinking shears, that would be an idea. Otherwise, just little snips around the curve section, and don't cut through the stitches. That'll do. Then we'll turn this right side out, so I'll just bring up my ironing mat and I'll give this a quick press. So keeping the seam right on the edge, iron that down. There we go, that's nice and neat. And then just to finish this off, I'm going to top stitch around that top curve. So I can lengthen the stitch now. I'm going up to a 2.8 on this machine. And just carefully stitch around the curve. That'll help to keep the lining and the outer fabrics neatly together, but it also gives a nice professional finishing touch. So there's the front pocket finished. Next up, we'll put the bungee in between the outer and the lining pieces, right at the top of the flap. So let's fold this in half and crease to mark the centre. Open it up. Where have you gone? And then this is going to be sewn facing inwards. And I want the ends of it to stay together, and it does tend to want to bounce apart. So I'm actually going to wrap a little bit of thread just around the edge, just to keep that into a circle. Some of these bungees have a metal piece in them. This one you can see where the join is. So that's the part that I'm going to put inside the fabric. And I'm just going to put a stitch through there. Wrap some thread around it. You won't see this, it's on the inside. And then just knot that off. And I'm just going to sew this close to the edge, right over where that crease was that I made, right within the seam allowance. Straight over where I've sewn to hold it together. So let's do the front of the pocket next. Sorry, the front of the pouch. So you're going to take your two pieces and sew these, just like before, right sides together, just across the top. And just like before, we'll fold this back and press it across the top, and then we'll top stitch it again. So you could make all of these panels in different coloured fabrics or different prints of fabric, which would be a lot of fun, I think. But other things you could use would be maybe a denim, a faux leather would look lovely. I'd use a fabric on the inside, like a cotton fabric on the inside if you're using a faux leather. Or cork would look really nice as well, very stylish. And I think, you know, in this day and age where a lot of us will have a tablet or a device of some kind or other, it's nice to have a personal case for it, isn't it? So a great gift idea as well. Right. Now let's put the whole thing together. So let's take the outside of the outer bag, the one with the flap, and my pocket is going to go button side down over the top, lining up the edges at the bottom, and then the front of my bag is going to go facing downwards over the top, again with all of the edges at the bottom lining up, and I will pop a couple of pins in there just to hold that in place for now. And we're going to sew straight across the bottom. You may need to increase your seam allowance slightly just to make sure that all of those layers are caught up. So I'm going up to just under ½ an inch with this one. And I've actually still got the longer stitch length on my machine, because you may find when you're sewing through lots of fabric like this, thicker layers of fabric, that your machine kind of slows down and your stitches get shorter. So although I'm on a 2.8, my stitches actually do look quite small, so I'd experiment with that a little bit. Okay, so let's take out the pins and then take the lining fabric from the backing and pop this face down, and I'm actually going to sew from this side, and you'll see why in just a second. So let's again have a few pins to hold all of those layers together, and then we'll sew all around the edge. Make sure that your hair bungee is facing downwards. We'll sew all the way around the edge, apart from a turning up in the bottom here of about 3 or 4 inches or about 10 centimetres. So carry on with this same stitch line, and we're going to go all the way around and stop around about here, and we'll do a little back stitch just to secure that seam and make sure it doesn't come undone when we're turning this through. Here's my back stitch, needle down in the corner, and let's sew all the way around. Out come the pins. I'm going to snip the corners off here because there's quite a lot of bulk, and that'll help the corner to sit a little bit squarer when we turn this through. And I'm also going to trim back the seam allowance just around the curved section, and that again will help the seam to sit flatter when we turn this through. And then we'll turn it the right side out. So there's my gap, and let's just push it all through. So again, although you've turned it the right side out, it does look a little bit inside out at the moment because that's the outside fabric. But before we do anything, we need to hand sew this opening closed in the bottom. So the smaller the opening you can leave, the better, because that's less hand stitching to sew it closed. So I'm just going to take a needle and thread. Now you can be as picky as you like with this. If you're going to be selling this or giving it as a gift, then make a ladder stitch and make a very small stitch so it's invisible. Unlikely that anybody is going to be looking on the inside of the pocket, to be honest, but you want to make that nice and neat. If it's for yourself, then just an over-edge stitch may work. Now the key is, I'm not going to sew all the way through to the outside because that means you're going to see the stitches. So I'm just going to catch the fabric on the lining and bring my needle up to the other side. So again, just catch it and move it across. Make sure the seam allowance is tucked inside. This one's folded over automatically. So we're just going to try and keep quite small stitches, keep them nice and neat, and just go across and close the opening. And now we turn inside out again, so those stitches are right at the bottom of the inside of the pocket, so again very unlikely they're ever going to be seen. And although it still may look as though it's inside out, you need to flip over the pocket at the bottom so that it comes to the top of the bag, like so. Now you're never going to get these corners perfectly square because there's so much fabric, so they will look slightly rounded, but we'll push that out with my turning tool so it's as square as I can make it from both sides of the pocket. There we go, and then we'll give it another press. Now I'm going to top stitch around here as well, so that's going to again give it a nice crisp finish. So let's get these seams nice and neat and right on the edge there. Always looks better when it's had a press, doesn't it? A nice bit of steam with this one as well. Got a thread there that needs to come off. I don't know where they come from. And I'm just going to top stitch from the top of the pocket here all the way around to the top of the front of the bag, sorry, not the pocket, just there. So if I open this up, you can see where my top stitching is already. I'm actually going to carry that line on and then carry on sewing, so that makes a nice neat finish. So up to the corner, and needle down and turn around. And this is the front of the bag, so make sure you're as neat as you can, because this is the bit that's going to be noticed most. Over the fastening, around the second curve, and back down. So I'm just opening up the bag again, just so I can line up with the original, whoops, top stitching across the front. Snip off the thread, and we're finished. So let's try it out for size. So just another little thread there. So you can pop in there. If I've got any pens or pencils, or maybe even a little notebook, or my mobile phone can go in there. This fastens over, and I've got a nice snug fit. So again, I think you can make these for any member of your family. Great for the youngsters, nice for, in fact you could have a different cover for the seasons, couldn't you? This one's looking particularly spring-like, but when you're making your own, and it's a very affordable way, when you consider the cost of buying things like this, a very affordable way of making your own. You could even accessorise to your outfit. How posh would that be? Okay, well, trying different fabrics. I think it's going to make a great gift idea for anybody in the family as well, because nowadays a lot of us have these tablets, don't we? So I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoy making yours, and I shall see you again very soon. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.